the worst thing we ever did was review the drama.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. Today, we're here to talk about the drama. But before we get into that, Daniel, do you want to let people know what they should be watching currently?
So, as promised, I finished season 2 of Paradise. We talked about this a little bit in the previous weeks, and I had seen the first 6 episodes and loved them, and there were 2 more episodes to go, and I watched those in the past week, and I'm less in love with those. But I think overall, this show is really solid. So basically, what it is about is that the world essentially ends in the explosion of a supervolcano. Scientists predict this, and there's no way to stop it. And so they build this bunker complex where the US government and a couple hundred or a couple thousand chosen people can basically survive this. And season 1 was about the president gets murdered a few years into this. And then season 2 is about somebody who worked for the Secret Service for the president in the dome, receives a message that tells him that his wife, who he thought died in the cataclysm, is actually alive. And so he goes out to look for her. And then the first 6 episodes are essentially different vignettes of the fates of different people who survived the cataclysm outside the dome, and their journeys essentially bring them together. And then in the last 2, those characters arrive at the dome because a faction has decided they want to lay siege to the dome to get access to the technology and resources that are inside. Things then go from there, and personal journeys kind of intersect and so on, right? So I think the first 6 episodes where you get these vignettes and the individual smaller stories, I think is one of the best post-apocalyptic stories I've seen in years, because each one is fairly standard in terms of what's happening, but it's just done really well, and it really spends close to an hour, essentially an episode on each person, and you really get to know what their life was like before the cataclysm and how they survived and what their life is like now and what place they're in. And that is really well done. I don't think I've cared about a fictional character this much in a few years. That's how good it is. And then the last 2 episodes kind of drive the plot forward, where essentially the dome has to be abandoned, and that creates a new status quo for season 3 with a revelation that kind of changes what the story is about in essentially the last episode. And I thought that was quite rushed and not as good. Like, the characters in the dome are nowhere near as interesting or as likable as the characters on the outside. And we spent so much time on their little problems and how that leads to the downfall of the dome that I just had a really hard time caring. And then we kind of reveal things that completely change kind of the status quo and what the stakes are and what the objective is for the third season, which on the one hand I kind of like that they're changing what kind of show this is every season so far. But I felt it was very rushed. It didn't seem foreshadowed or established at all. And it felt almost like they were making stuff up because they had to bring the season to a conclusion and didn't plan for it, which doesn't strike me as very good writing. The main story was kind of underwhelming, but the side stories were all wonderful. So it's kind of a weird mix. And it's not enough for me to kind of say, okay, I'm not going to watch season 3, because I think I kind of thought that after season 1, and now I'm kind of thinking I'm going to at least check out season 3 to see where they're going with this. But I can't say I like the main story in The Vault, which is kind of a big deal.
Yeah, I kind of like agree with you in the sense that obviously I think they gave a lot more stronger like kind of character moments and like fleshed out the characters a lot more for the characters on the outside. And I think that was just like to do with like the change of approach, even though I actually kind of like what they did with Jane in sort of her sort of kind of piece, when we kind of understand her a little bit more and sort of try to understand like the psyche behind her and like why she's kind of so dedicated to what she does. Like I did quite like that and like how they fleshed it out. But I think, like you said, like ultimately what's happening in the dome outside of like Sinatra, for me, like the characters aren't too compelling. And yeah, like hard to disagree that they kind of sped run the last 2 episodes, kind of getting to what Alex was. But I do feel like there was like little like kind of like crumbs and piecings in there to kind of like tie in, you know, things like time travel and like alternate realities and like something's up to a sense. And then you kind of get the big reveal. So I wasn't like too disappointed with that reveal.
Maybe I just paid attention to the wrong things, but I just didn't get the feeling that was going on, like there was a mystery that needed to be answered. I don't know, maybe I missed it.
Yeah, I think it was like the whole like thing with like Alex and like what is Alex and who is Alex and like why like certain things happening and stuff like that. But yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. Could have been done so much better.
Agree. But my best thing watched, I will give it to I'll give it to Daredevil season two. Well, the Disney Plus season two of Daredevil. Like it's not going to be like the finest TV you're ever going to watch, but I just like love kind of being back in that world. I think they've kind of turned it up a notch a little bit after what was like a bit of like a choppy production for season one, where they're kind of like meshing kind of two different productions together to try and put out a season one. I think this one's kind of gone back to its roots of sort of where it was at in the Netflix series, as gritty, as brutal. The dynamic between like Kingpin and Daredevil is great. All the same, I think they do like a good job of like just like carrying the show itself. Like the main plot for me is kind of like whatever. Like I'm obviously it's like interesting. I'm enjoying it. Like they're trying to like hunt down the vigilantes and this that and the other. But I think it's just like strongly carried by just like what Daredevil and Kingpin bring to the series as a whole. Like those two are just like two very well casted characters in the show. So definitely enjoying it. Excited to actually see Jessica Jones in this. I think you said you didn't like Jessica Jones' series. I actually quite liked her series on Netflix.
No, I'm on record that season one is some of the best superhero stuff I've seen.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Maybe I was confused on that one, but no, I really liked it.
I think season two falls off. And season one has a pacing problem where you can cut the middle third and the story is still intact. But on balance, season one of Jessica Jones is pretty amazing.
Yeah. I think I forget season two, but yeah, no, I agree, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how they bring her back in and how they incorporate her sort of kind of back into this. So yeah, I would recommend checking it out.
Can you jump into it without having seen season one? Because I watched half of season one and eventually gave up because I just could not get into it.
I mean, the whole dynamic of the world and like Wilson Fisk being mayor, like there's just like kind of small things that you need to understand for like the status quo of where it's at. But I think if you've watched half of season one, then I think you can kind of jump into season two. Just knowing that Fisk is mayor and he's hunting down vigilantes and stuff like that, then yeah, I think you can kind of jump straight into season two.
Yet I can't even point to what was so bad about season one. I don't think it was that bad, but I just could not get myself to be excited about it. I don't know. I guess it's okay to jump into season two in that case.
Yeah, I don't know if you know the problems with season one, but season one was basically they were first going to make it its own brand new thing initially, and then kind of partway through it wasn't working, and then they decided to actually tie it back into the Netflix series. So then you have like two different productions or two different ideas that you then have to like try and hash together as quick as possible to get season one out. Just to get season one out, and then of course you then actually have the people working on season two now with like a clearer direction, actually being able to put some good work in.
Yeah, I'd heard it was something like this, but I didn't know the details. But certainly watching it, it felt very unfocused. Like they were trying to do multiple things at a time, and that kind of explains it. So I might check that out. All right, shall we move on to the main attraction? So the drama is so Wikipedia calls it a romantic dark comedy, and I don't think that's the case. I don't think it's a comedy at all. I think it's just a drama about these two people who are engaged to be married. While they are like out drinking with friends, they kind of play this game where each one of them kind of confesses the worst thing they've done. And the bride, Emma, confesses that as a teenager, she got close to committing a school shooting when she was like 15. And that drives a wedge between her and her husband, Charlie. And it essentially ruins their friendship with their closest friends, who are best man and bridesmaid. And the rest of the movie is basically the characters coming to terms with what they have learned about each other and how to handle that, and whether they even want to have a life together after knowing this, and if the other person even was the person they thought they were, and whether they can forgive that or overlook that, or if this is something that requires them to split up. So what did we think of the drama?
I really liked it. I thought it was really well done. So I didn't know what the kind of main driving point of the movie was going to be. I kind of went in blind, hadn't seen any of the trailers or anything like that. And I actually think it makes for a great viewing experience if you kind of go into it not really knowing what to expect, because the ultimate, not plot twist scene, but the pivotal scene which sets off the course of the movie that happens, I thought we were just in like any other scene, and we were just like doing this like kind of get to know each other with like this other couple or whatever. And I didn't know that was like the inciting moment for everything that was gonna follow afterwards. So at first I was kind of like watching it, and I was like, this is kind of belong, the scene where they're kind of going with it, why is it dragging? And then you kind of hit the moment, you're like, oh, okay. And then you kind of see like the fallout and the reaction and stuff like that. And I think where this movie does really well is it kind of does a good job of like capturing everyone's kind of like emotions, and it does a good job of like raising a discussion amongst kind of like the viewers in terms of seeing it from multiple different perspectives, how people reacted, how certain things like influence other people, and like what that kind of does, and how you see this your significant other once you like learn something deep and dark about them. And I actually like I'll give it to the director as well in terms of like some of the creative shots and some of the creative choices that sort of they took with it. For example, how Charlie would see Emma in this, post learning what what she was like planning to do, and how he couldn't kind of like look past her at the age at certain points and stuff like that. So yeah, that was like quite good. And it's actually funny. I know you said it's not really a comedy. This was funny in so many places. Like this, literally, not just myself, but like multiple people in the audience were just like laughing at so many different scenes in this movie. And I don't know how intentional it was. Obviously, it calls itself like a dark comedy, but I don't know, man. I was sort of laughing, having a great time with it.
We might have to talk about that because I didn't laugh once, but I didn't feel like it was trying to be funny. So we might get into that. So I had a little bit of a different approach to this. I knew what the big reveal was, and I was a little bit like I was mostly curious about how they were going to pull this off, because it didn't seem like that bad a thing. And then it kind of turns out that that's the point, that it's not so much about, oh, look what an awful person Emma is. It's look what everybody's reaction to this is. And that's what the movie is about. So for that reason, like, you don't even have to have an opinion about whether or not Emma is that, well, if she had done this, she would have been an awful person, but she didn't. And then the question is, the fact that she almost did it and that the fact that she wanted to, is that enough to judge her? Like, even 20 years later, right? And that is the entirety of the movie. That is what every character goes through in the end, or tries to work through. And I think that part is quite well done. You have these characters flailing around, trying to make sense of this and trying to make a decision about what to do, because it's days before the wedding and they can still call it off, but that's a one-way street. And if they're overreacting now, they're walking away from something great, and so on, right? Because up until that point, they were quite happy together and so on. Like, I think this entire thing, like, there's basically 4 characters in this, maybe 5, depending on how you count. And each one of them is essentially working through this idea, right? Or this question. And I think that whole interaction and the process of them doing that is really well done, with a lot of intentional, like you said, intentional symbolism, and the way things are shot and the way all of this unfolds is really deliberate and well done and intentional, and gives a good window into what these people are thinking and what choices they end up making in the end. And all of that is really well done. And if you can get on board with that basic idea, this is a great movie. Let's talk about it.
Cool. I mean, where do we want to start? Do we want to start at the actual incident itself?
Yeah, so basically it's fairly simple. It's basically Emma. She says that she was 28 when they met. This is maybe she's maybe 30 now or something. And she was an outcast as a teenager, had no friends, was bullied, was alienated. So if she's 30 now, and this was 15 years ago, this would have been like 2012, thereabouts. So like 15 years after Columbine, but at a time when school shootings were kind of in the news, right? When a major one seemed to be happening. I think, unless I'm misplacing it, but like it seems like that was something that was on the news at the time. And that is why it was on Emma's mind as a thing she could do, as a way to get back at people, at the world and at society, because of how badly they're treating her. Part of this was that I didn't really buy that she was in such a bad place, because the bullying that's being portrayed is quite tame and basic. And I don't know, like, it's like they even talk about how there are almost no girls who commit school shootings, right? And I think if you have a female character who does something like this, you kind of have to, it's unusual. Like, and I think you would have to do a little bit more explaining for why she does something so, like, it's unusual for anybody. She's completely opposite of kind of the profile kind of thing. And I felt what that wasn't justified.
I think that was kind of half the point as well, is that, and I think the movie does this in several places where you really want to like grasp onto like, okay, like I can really understand, I can really get why, she would be pushed into that mental state. But I think even like in that scene when she's kind of explaining it, she's kind of like saying it And then everyone's a bit like, is that it? Or like, was there anything else? And obviously, like, 15 years later, you might not remember everything clearly, but I think the movie in that, and like as she's kind of explaining what was happening and like how it, like, and kind of portraying it wasn't that bad. It's not really to do with kind of what actually happened to her, more so than the kind of like mental state that she was in a sense that, she kind of felt like an outcast. She like moved several times and it was like difficult for her to like really integrate into like the school community per se. And she kind of like found identity or like found some like belonging in like, these like school shooters or whatever for that small period of time. But this idea of like there needed to be like something significant and like people really like being harsh to her and really pushing her out. I think the movie does certainly like let you know that like those like excuses were like a little bit flimsy. It's just you were just like in a bad mental state. And again, you can kind of see as well in like the reason that she didn't do it was the moment she started to like feel that sense of community and like feel accepted and feel welcome and like feel part of something, feel a little bit more seen, is when she kind of like did a 180 and was actually sort of kind of an activist against gun crime. And I think that kind of like partly also like highlights the fragility of some of these school shooters, because some of the times it's like it's obviously it's like the quiet kid that they'll say. It's like, oh, it was the quiet kid, and it's just like someone that you like maybe don't really observe, or like you're not really like paying too much attention to. And it's not necessarily to say that they're really getting bullied, but it's just that one person that might feel ostracized and separated from everyone else. And every single action that then happens after that is taken in a way that is perceived to be like, they don't like me and they don't want me, and like I hate these people, even though she hasn't like made an effort or like tried to like be assimilated into the community. If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I totally buy that to a 15-year-old, this stuff is the most important thing ever. I remember being 15. I remember struggling with like making friends and that sort of thing, and what other people say about you and how they treat you. High school is your world at that point, right? And I can totally understand kind of that kind of resentment and alienation building up. And that is kind of the first step towards doing something like this, right? It's more like, it seemed a little bit hand wavy, where the movie kind of just says, oh, like she gets called names a few times, and that's so terrible, and that's kind of it in terms of justifying it. Like, for instance, we don't really justify why she latches onto this image of the school shooter, because she dresses up like these people with the rifle and with the camouflage clothing, and she records these messages that she never sends, and so on, right? When she's home alone in the afternoon, she kind of gets her hands on her father's rifle and kind of plays military, right? Or plays militia kind of thing, because it gives her a sense of empowerment and purpose and agency, right? That she's in control, like she has the power, right? Because she has the gun. I don't know, like I felt like there was a step missing where it justified why that appealed to her. And she outright says, I don't know, I thought it was cool. And like she doesn't even understand it herself 20 years later. Something like this would not be totally rational, right? To anybody who does this, but there's kind of like patterns of how people get put on these trajectories. And I feel like it was incomplete in her case.
Yeah, I can understand why you would see it like that. Yeah, there could be like that step missing of like why she became, why she kind of aligned with that, especially when they kind of show that she kind of is looking for like that belonging and looking to join some type of community when she becomes an anti-gun activist. It could quite easily, or they could have done a good job of like kind of showing how someone like that could be led astray and could be swayed just by like things that they see online or like conversations or discourse or whatever.
One thing I actually did like about this is how little it took for her to go on a different track, right? All it takes is one person reaching out and saying, hey, do you want to hang out? And that changed everything for her. As somebody who has struggled with kind of making friends and that sort of thing, growing up, sometimes all it took was just meeting the right person at the right time, and somebody just invites you to something, and that can change everything. You know what I mean? But before that happens, right up until the point where that happens, it seems impossible, right? Where you are just like in a four-way dead-end road, and there's walls everywhere, and nobody will ever talk to you. And then all it takes is one person. And that put her on this track, and she found then belonging in this group. And I don't even know that she cares that much about gun control, but it was her thing at that point, right? It was what got her accepted, what got her celebrated, and what people approved of her and reacted positively to her. And she never looked back, right? It's not like she had these relapses, right? It's not like she was a violent person by nature. She was lonely and resentful. And once she didn't have a reason to be resentful anymore, she moved on. I think the movie makes that part very clear.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree. And it's kind of funny that you say that she wasn't a violent person afterwards, because one thing that the kind of movie does well, or like kind of one element of the reaction and like the trying to understand and piece together who this person is afterwards, is like when Charlie is almost like thinking back to like incidents that they've previously had, like when she was like shouting at the man in the car and she was like kind of acting a little bit more aggressive and like, was a little bit more confrontational in that moment, or when she was like, when they were like in bed and like sleeping together and they were him and she was like slapping him and he was kind of like trying to understand, like almost like recontextualizing that context of, actually, have I missed the signs and has she been like this violent person this whole time? I think it handled like that element of sort of his ambiguity or uncertainty or whatever the word is. I think it handled that well. I mean, a lot's been said about like Rachel's reaction as well at the dinner table. What was your thoughts and take about like how strongly she reacted?
Rachel is a really interesting character. So basically, Rachel is the maid of honor, and she reacts extremely negatively to what Emma is saying because her cousin, I think, was injured in a school shooting and is in a wheelchair now, which is true, but I don't even buy that that is why she reacts this way. That seems to be a little bit like an excuse or, I don't know, a scapegoat or something like that. But she has this very visceral reaction. She never forgives Emma for essentially something she didn't do 15 years ago, years before she knew her. And I think Rachel's unreasonableness in how she reacts is one of the big pillars of the movie, where not only is she reacting in this way, in a way that I think is completely overblown and out of line, but also what she did was worse because she locked a handicapped kid in a locker in the woods and just walked away and kind of makes excuses about, oh, like the search party found them a day later, so it's all fine and whatever. But like she actually caused harm, right? Like the kid didn't die, but being locked in a closet in the woods. I think there was like a bus that had crashed or something, or a plane or something. There was like a locker that the kid was locked in, and being stuck in there for a night, especially if you have like some sort of mental handicap. We don't get details on what the condition is, but that surely can't make it better or easier. Like that causes actual harm. So she's the one who did, like, I don't think the others actually do something that actually caused harm, and she's the only one where that's the case, right?
Yeah, apart from like her husband was, he held like the girl in his like ex in front of the dog, and like the dog attacked the girl and he kind of like cowered behind her.
That's like a character issue, right? That looks bad, right? But it's more about how it looks than what actually happened, right? It's not actually got injured or bitten because of it.
Yeah, no, exactly, yeah.
So it actually could have, but she didn't, right? And that's another case of this could have led to real harm, but it didn't. And in Rachel's case, there was actual harm. She just never lets go of it, right? And Charlie basically spends half the movie trying to get her to come around, and it never works, right? And to the point where she then makes a big scene at the wedding when she gives her bridesmaid speech. And yeah, I thought that was really well done, not just because that kind of irrationality I think is easy to make cartoonish, but they didn't. I think they portrayed it in a way where in Rachel's head, it all made sense. And because we're looking at this from the outside, we can see the double standard and how it's overblown and how it's not actually addressing an issue, right? Like it's not like Emma is that kind of person, right? It's it's something she almost did once.
I was gonna say, I think as well with like Rachel, and what's interesting about her is it's almost like how you can forgive yourself and you can kind of like you can rationalize what you did. Like she did was like, oh, there was a search party anyways, and like they found him and like it wasn't that bad, and they found him the next day and this any other. It was just like one night. Versus how you don't have like that same level of like empathy, and like not for everyone, but how people can like not have that same level of empathy or understanding for other people, even if what you've done is way worse, and and in reality you actually caused harm, but you can try to rationalize it and be like, no, but I know I'm not a bad person, I know I'm not really like this, and really and truthfully I'm like a nice person, that was just like a one-off or whatever. Versus how you then paint someone as, even though you didn't actually do it, you thought about shooting up school, but this is you now, and that is like who you are, and I'm not going to look past that at all. And no amount of like excuses, no amount of reasoning behind it, or like why like you got bullied or whatever. And like even when like Charlie was trying to explain about how she might have like seen her best friend die, and like it could have been like loosely linked as to why she went down that particular path, she just wasn't hearing any of it. So I thought that was like a really good representation of how you can quite easily forgive yourself, but just really not have that same level of like empathy or understanding for others.
And how arbitrary it is who gets a second chance and who gets defined by a mistake, right? Where Rachel did the worst thing and was the only one to actually cause harm, but she never paid any price for it, right? Even after she confesses this to her friends, she never pays a price for it, right? This could have gone the other way around, where Charlie and Emma do not want, like, I think they get close, right? Where I think they talk about disinviting Rachel at one point, because of what she did. I think that's more in the contrast of like, why is she so mad at us when we should be mad at her, kind of thing. But this entire conversation could have gone the other way, where people kind of skip over Emma and everybody piles onto Rachel, depending on how the crowd feels at that point, right? And this whole idea about who gets defined by this one mistake and who doesn't get a do-over and who doesn't get a second chance. I think the whole point of the story is that this is so arbitrary. Like, I think, and this kind of ties into things like, what's it called? Like hate mobs on the internet. Like, there was this phenomenon in Korea a few years ago where a woman was filmed on the subway. Essentially, her dog fouled on the subway and she didn't clean it up, and somebody filmed it, and the entire country piled onto her to the point where she, like, her life was destroyed. And that person never, like, eventually faded out of the public consciousness, but like that person's life was essentially ruined. And there's other people who did worse things that day who didn't get any repercussions even close to this, right? So I think the arbitrariness and the disproportionality of it is what the point of, like, that's the point of the story.
I think as well is that she kind of almost like influenced everyone else in that room with like how strong her reaction was, because you could kind of see it in a way where like you said, this could have easily been flipped on her and everyone could have had a strong reaction with her, but you know, everyone kind of looked at it as like, you know, it was like ages ago, it didn't end up being that bad, and like, you know, it was okay, and like they kind of like then moved on to Charlie, and like Charlie kind of told his story. But it was almost as if because her reaction was so strong, it then focuses on that more, and then people then have to then, you know, actually like acknowledge, okay, no, how do I actually feel about it, as opposed to kind of like just like brushing it out from under the carpet and be like, oh, maybe that was a little bit effed up, and like, you know, try to like move it on and like kind of keep the peace. But like it was almost like her strong reaction then centered the conversation on her, and it's like they've completely forgot about like the game that they were playing. Now everyone has to sort of, you know, just deal with what Emma did, and like, you know, was it that bad? And you got Charlie trying to rationalize it a little bit, but also whilst being shocked that actually, no, I didn't know this about you, and this is how other people react. Like, you know, he probably, like, he still clearly does love her, and you see that play out for the movie, but he's kind of constantly seeking out validation from like other people as to like, is it that bad? Like, you know, what she did, like, you know, how do other people like think about it, and what would other people do in his situation, essentially. But yeah, it was just like her reaction just had a controlling aspect on the room.
And it's all about her at this point, right? Like Mike, who is her boyfriend, husband, like he's constantly just trying to run interference the entire time, trying to get her to calm down, trying to get her to de-escalate, trying to kind of deflect and move on, and it never quite works. And for half the movie, Charlie tries to reason with Rachel as well, right? So Rachel is kind of this attention black hole, right? She just draws in all the attention and all the oxygen, and Emma is kind of just on the sidelines and essentially left to fend for herself with the consequences of what just happened, right? So I think Rachel is a really interesting character in that way. Like the way she, like, I don't think it's even on purpose. I think it's just her personality, and everybody kind of just feels the need to pay attention to her because of how she's acting.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and then that then leads to like her whole speech at the wedding and stuff like that. Yeah, although like if that like that whole wedding, I was just like, it's difficult to watch and difficult to see, just like how strongly and how like wrong everything was going at that wedding for everyone. And she was like, it almost felt fake in a sense, and obviously like there's this whole element of weddings being a performance and this and the other, and like they kind of like allude to it, or like they kind of like say it when they're sort of doing the dance rehearsals about how it's like a performance and this, that, and the other, and whatever. And it's not even like the song that they really want to do in that particular moment anyways.
I think they set up that idea very clearly. Like it's the choreographer who tries to get them to do the perfect dance, and she makes it very clear that this is not just two people dancing, this is a performance, and you have to get it perfect, otherwise people will judge you for it and will remember it as, you know, an awful wedding or whatever, and you have to put on a show for all of your guests, right? And then the photographer is similar, where she's a little bit more subtle about it, but she also tries to get them to perform, right?
Yeah, and they're just completely awkward throughout the whole photo shoot. Actually, you were asking about the funny moments in the movie. That was one of them. After they learned about it and they've gone to the photographer, and she's like, so I'm going to shoot you, and I'm going to shoot your dad, and then we're going to shoot your parents, and I'm going to shoot your parents. I was absolutely dying at that, because again, like this photographer is just like natural like photo talk and this, that, and the other, and like how she's just doing her job. But then it's just completely awkward, especially with like the revelation that we have earlier. and just like seeing their reaction to it. And when you recontextualize the word like I'm gonna shoot you, it just made it like 10 times funnier.
But I think that one really was really jarring to me because it's so unlike the rest of the movie. Like, it's not like this whole thing is like such a thick farce that stuff like this is happening. Like, you could imagine a version of this movie where that was the movie, like, and that happened over and over, and people were constantly saying things that kind of had a double meaning, and Charlie and Emma have to cringe through it and have to, like you can imagine like a sitcom episode like this, right? So it wasn't that kind of funny. Obviously, I picked up on that, but it's kind of just one scene, and it was more the awkwardness. I think there were like one or two other things where people say things that kind of really cut home, and I didn't find it as so much funny as like when something is on your mind, sometimes people will inadvertently say things that kind of remind you of that thing. To you, it cuts close to home, and the other person doesn't even know what's going on, right? So I thought it was something more like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. But then that was like what was like funny. Like the movie, if it's called a comedy, they were obviously like trying to be funny in places, but it was more like aligned to kind of like my type of humor, where it's just like a little bit dark, or it's something that's like real. Like again, like for me, I like a sense of like realism in the comedy. You can like kind of relate to something and also like find it funny at the same time. I don't have like all the examples in my head of sort of when they were doing this, but there were just like so many moments, and I was just like honestly just dying at some of the things that popped up.
I guess it didn't strike me so much as funny and more as tragic, because for 100 minutes I was watching these people with the zero life skills try to figure this out. Especially Charlie specifically. He essentially becomes the main character in this, right? Where he is caught between his friends and Emma, and what he thinks is right and what he thinks is true, and none of those things line up. And he wants to stay with Emma, and he loves her, but he has these doubts, right? And you mentioned earlier like these things where he imagines her as the 15-year-old, and he wonders what she was like at that point, and he just cannot get this image out of her head of the Emma that would have killed people.
What I really liked about that is that it's just in like a moment where they're just like walking and just like holding hands and just like having what would be perceived as a normal moment, but then all those doubts are still in his head while she's having like a grand old time. Like she's like, and you could kind of see for like most of the like first part, she kind of just tried to keep like moving past it and like moving forward and try to like be as normal as possible about it. But it was just like in those like normal moments, or like when they're just like kind of like walking holding hands, where in his mind all he can think about is like her being the school shooter. So I really liked how like they did it and how like they inserted it into the movie.
This whole idea of, at one point do you become defined by one action or one statement, right? And in his mind, he's defining Emma in those terms, right? But the thing I was kind of building up to was Charlie specifically, but all of the characters in this have zero way of dealing with this. They just have this gut instinct that this is horrible, and they try to intellectualize it, and they try to deal with it in a way that is consistent with their values and their view of the world, but they have zero skills to do it. They have this whole thing where I think him and Rachel talk at one point of should they call the police? Or Rachel says, should we call the police? That sort of thing.
That was at the dinner table, and it was a bit like, what is the police going to do in this situation?
Yeah. Instinctively, they feel like something's wrong, so you call the police. But why? Because somebody almost committed a crime 15 years ago? Right? Like, it makes no sense, but that's kind of their thing they go to. And then when Charlie visits Rachel at her work, and they have this conversation where he basically tries to get her to come back, like they essentially have this debate because he's British, she's American. They have this thing about how this is like Emma is a victim of her culture because that's just what America is like. And then Charlie keeps trying to find explanations for it, right? Like when he finds out that Emma's father was in the military and therefore there was a gun in the house, he tried to find an explanation for how that corrupted Emma. Like at the wedding, where like after the father gives the speech and Charlie is just grasping for anything, trying to make sense of this, how the woman he knows and he loves could do something like this, or could be in that position, and he just cannot make sense of it. One
question, because you're kind of talking about like the dynamics between like Charlie being British. Like, how important do you think it was for Charlie to be British and a bit of an outsider in this? How did that kind of like help kind of tell the narrative of the story?
I don't think it matters until there's this rift between him and the others, where he kind of defaults to, oh, you Americans, like this is how you are. It's guns and school shootings and that sort of thing, because in Europe we don't really have this. I think in Germany, in my country, there have been 3 in my lifetime, something like that. And in the US, there's just a lot more, right? And so it becomes an American thing at some point. And I can totally see myself like, after living in the US for 10 years and having American friends and whatever, at some point that kind of comes out, right? Because on some level you think of that as an American thing. And I think that's been buried in the back of his mind for so long, and it doesn't normally come up. But here it comes out because he's grasping for anything, and that's the one, like, it's the last thing that makes sense to him because he's tried everything else. Honestly, like, I've lived in the UK for 12 years. Sometimes it comes out like, yeah, that's what the Brits do. This is typically British. Even though I've lived here for 12 years and some of my best friends are British and all of that. You know what I mean? Like, it's that moment of it just coming back, like, to the surface is absolutely realistic, especially since Charlie is in this survival mode where he has to make sense of it. He has to intellectualize it. He has to read 10 Atlantic articles about gun violence in order to make sense of this, right? Like, it cannot simply be just a person in a difficult situation. It has to be a structural, socioeconomic, political thing, just because that is how he thinks. But it's his only coping mechanism. He has no other way of making sense of this. Even the others can't really explain why they're so freaked out by this. Like, it's not like not even Rachel can point to something specific about why this means she should throw away a decade of friendship with Emma, right? I just found that really interesting, that essentially portrays all of these very affluent and sophisticated and privileged people as completely, like, as kind of losers who don't have basic life skills. And like, this is kind of just the instance that brings that to the forefront, because that's maybe the biggest crisis they've had in their lives in terms of not knowing what to do, and they cannot handle it. None of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, except for Mike. He's just suffering the entire time because his friends won't get their act together. Like, he was like the one likable character in all of this.
Yeah, it was almost like he was trying to be reasonable at first, and then he had that moment where he was like telling Charlie to like call the wedding off and just like leave and whatever, and like he was just like trying to be the supportive friend in any way, like first trying to de-escalate his wife, and then when he kind of saw like actually Charlie was questioning it, oh, like, what can I do for my friend Charlie? But he was just like trying to like support any way he can.
He's trying to be reasonable, he's trying to help, but even he doesn't really have any answers.
I love the moment, again, that's another funny moment, when she was like, oh, yeah, Mike grew up around guns, and he was like, no, I didn't.
Yeah, well, see, that's this other thing, right? Like, this is probably the first racist thing they've said in ever. They've been friends for 10 years, and this is the first time this has happened.
From his wife as well.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done, because, and then it's not, I don't think she even meant it this way, but as she was saying it, everybody realized that's how it sounds, right?
Yeah.
I think he's almost the poshest of all of them.
Almost, yeah. Yeah.
Didn't he say something about how he grew up?
I can't remember exactly if he said how he grew up, but you could clearly tell that this isn't a person that had like experienced what you would say as like growing up in the hood or growing up around like, you know, like violence. He didn't look like someone that had like come from the bottom and like worked his way up to the top. It looked like he was kind of born amongst some level of privilege, or like parents that had done that before him.
Yeah, I don't remember off the top of my head what it was he said, but like, he did not, like, he grew up at least middle class, right, in some suburbia or something. But it kind of shows, like, it's the same thing as when Charlie goes to the well of, oh, you Americans, right? It's the same thing. And it's something that's under the surface and that they've hidden away because they've been socialized to not say things like this. But like, in a moment of stress and when they have nothing else, it kind of comes out. A lot of the times in movies, stuff like this is really, really unsubtle and really like has the subtlety of a sledgehammer. And here that felt really real.
Yeah, no, I agree.
The moments like this really make the movie. I think the plot itself, like, it's not so much about should you forgive Emma. I think that part, is pretty clear. It's about watch these people try and fail to come to terms with this. Like, as their perfect world falls apart. But I've got another topic, which is the idea of the lie, right? So there's multiple instances of lying, and it's not all bad, right? So Charlie's and Emma's relationship begins with a lie, right? Where he sees her in the coffee shop, she's reading a book, he Googles the book and pretends to have read it. And he kind of comes clean up. First of all, it's a clumsy lie, because all he had to say is, hey, I heard about this book, can you recommend it? What are your thoughts on it? And that starts a conversation, which would still be a lie, but it's a smaller lie than, oh, I've read this book, when he hasn't. And then he has to come clean in like the second or third date. But like, a good thing begins with a lie, right? And then Charlie cheats, right? Almost cheats on her, right? Much like Emma, she almost does a bad thing and then is judged for it, right? So Emma, school shooting, doesn't go through with it, gets judged for it. Charlie almost cheats on Emma with like this coworker. I don't see the name right now, but he almost cheats on Emma with his coworker, right? And kind of backs off at the last second. But he also then gets judged for that, which is also a form of, like, the cheating is a form of lying, right? And then Emma twice in the movie plays this game of let's pretend we're meeting for the first time so we get a do-over, right? And the first time, Charlie thinks it's stupid and rejects it and just shuts her down completely, and he wants to talk this out. And then at the end of the movie, she does it again when they meet up in the diner again, and he goes for it. He says, okay, after everything we've been through, let's just start again. And which is a form of lying, right? Like, it's not, they're not being honest. Like, they're saying not true things. But here it's the lie. So their relationship was started by a lie, it was destroyed by 2 lies, and then it's saved by a 4th lie, right?
I actually quite liked that whole kind of like through line of them wanting to like kind of start over or like do over and like meet again, because it's almost like, you know, kind of with obviously like tying in with the rest of the movie, it's kind of stripping away everything, stripping away sort of all the sort of biases or like ideas that you've kind of like grown to have about like the person, like who they are and what they are, and it's like kind of like trying to bring it back to that almost like pure form of like when you first met, and like trying to like recapture that love or recapture that like initial spark to try and sort of take the relationship in a more healthier direction without, you know, all of the baggage that was just happening. Like you said, at first, like Charlie wasn't ready for it, and he kind of like shuts it down, rejects it, and whatever. And then the last time that it does happen is it's almost like he can like put himself in her shoes, in a sense where obviously like he's almost done a bad thing but hasn't done it, and then has completely like fallen into his like lowest moment at the wedding, where, you know, he's kind of like gone all out and, you know, did an absolute atrocious speech, and is like just kind of being judged by everyone for what he did. And then in that moment, it's almost like he's almost like on the receiving end of what she was, and he kind of like, it's almost like he like understands a little bit more, and he's like in her shoes, essentially. And it's like you said, it's that lie of we don't know each other and we don't know all the bad things and all like the baggage and all the sort of dumb things that we've done in the past, and like let's just, you know, try to trick ourselves into thinking that this is the very first time, let's get to know each other again. And it's almost like an additional lie to it. It's like, tell me all the good things. It's not like a lie, but it's like trying to get to know the other person again. And typically when you do that, you're like putting your best foot forward, and you're like trying to like hide all that emotional stuff that you have in the background. So it's almost like an additional lie, because you're like hiding all the junk that you kind of come with.
Calling it a lie is like technically true, right? But I do think it is just pretending that none of this happened. And I have a feeling they will never bring this up again, just because they know how poorly it goes when they do. Right? So from this point on, they will just pretend none of this happened, and they will never talk about it again. And that is how they make it work, I think.
I wouldn't say that they wouldn't talk about it again, but it's more we're retackling this issue, but on the same team, as in like on the same page. Like we're falling in love again, and we're like gonna do this as a team, because they clearly love each other and they clearly want to be together. So it's more, hey, let's start again, and like, you know, we're on the same team kind of thing.
I do think it is about, we tried to talk this out and it didn't work, and it only made it worse. So let's just not. Like, they've tried everything else and that failed, so now that's what they're doing. And it's a little bit childish, like especially the first time Emma does it. I don't know, like I was not on board with her at that point, but by the end of it, after they've gone through all of their stuff, I kind of sympathize with them wanting to do this, just put it behind them, because both of them kind of know now what the deal is, both of them know what the deal with the other person is, and none of them have run away, right? So I think maybe that's all they need to know about each other at this point.
The fact that they ended up in the same place as well, after like everything that had happened, after like the whole world almost fell apart, but it kind of showed their similarities, in the sense that obviously like they talked about when people win the Oscar, they go to this like burger place in whatever, I think it's like In-N-Out in America, and they get like a cheeseburger in like their crowning moment. They go there with their tux and whatever, and the fact that they both end up there, and I don't think it's like intentional, I think it was like, you know, really well done.
I don't like, they didn't plan this, right? Like Charlie didn't go there expecting to meet Emma. I think Emma suggests it, right? At some point. And he says, oh, that's stupid. Let's not do that. But after, like, at that point, both of them have nothing left, right? Like, what else are they gonna do? It's like sit at home and feel sorry for themselves, right? Because at that point, like, there's nothing they could do otherwise.
Yeah, true.
And the fact that they both make the same decision is kind of, again, a point of commonality, right? And it kind of mirrors how they met, right? Because they kind of went to the same place and they had the same taste in, you know, where to have their coffee and whatever. And that was something they had in common. But Charlie had to come up with a story to talk to her, right? But it kind of parallels what happens in the diner at the end, right? Because they both go to the same place. They independently make the same choice to go to the same place in the same situation. And that kind of gives them something in common. Except this time they don't have to pretend. But then they do. Like they pretend about not knowing each other. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's definitely like there's symbolism there and there's a parallel there where like kind of the beginning and the end are supposed to book, like those two events are supposed to bookend their story.
I feel like there's like a through line there because there's like other moments in the movie where they try to do like the conflict resolution and then like, you know, she like mid argument pulls his pants down to kind of like try to diffuse the situation, and then he tries to do it on her, or like she'll like try to play like the music that they like, you know, make up to or something. There's something there amongst like how they've like tried to conflict resolve from like beginning to like the end and like how they get to there. But I don't know, I haven't like pieced it together or whatever. But actually, how did you think about, well, I don't know if you have like an opinion on that, but I was going to say, like, what did you think about the ending? And it did seem a bit abrupt, but it also did seem at like the right point to end the movie as well. They were like doing that whole thing where they like meet each other at the end. And then I actually do feel like I heard like a few people around me as well. It was like, oh, it's like the movie's done. Like it almost seemed like there was like going to be like a continuation afterwards. And it kind of like threw me for a bit of a loop. And obviously, like, as we kind of discussed it is like the logical point to end the movie. But I don't know if you had like that same feeling of whiplash of like the movie being over in that very moment.
So I do think it works because like, and it's exactly the right point, because in a classical character arc, characters learn a lesson and then overcome a hurdle they couldn't overcome before. And here it's kind of the inverse, where they try to overcome the problem, but their ways of doing it are completely ineffective, right? Charlie tries to intellectualize everything, and Emma tries to run away from everything and just not talk about it. And both approaches fail throughout the movie. And where they finally come back together in the end is where they strip away everything except for we want to be together, right? And we're gonna make this work somehow. Like they stop arguing, they just try to build a connection as people. And that is like their decision to do that is the end of their journeys. And that is the last scene. So I do think that is exactly what it needs to be.
I don't know, it felt weird in the cinema. It just felt like we just stopped and I was like, oh shit, movie's over, kind of thing. But no, that's fine.
Yeah, I kind of like understated endings like this, where the implication is after this it all works out. Like we didn't have to see like an epilogue unless there was a mid-credit scene or something like that where we see them getting married eventually. I doubt that's there, but they could have had like a montage at the end where they go through the steps of the wedding again. And this time it works out. You know what I mean? They could have done that, and them not doing that, I think, makes the ending stronger because it's all left in the implication, but we get all the pieces we need to figure out the reason they have struggled has been overcome. And that's why the conflict is over. And that's why the story is over.
That makes sense. Any other points?
No, I think we've covered it. Like, I think there's lots of details kind of to go into here about how this movie kind of had an uphill battle with me because I disliked all of these characters except for Mike. Everybody else is completely insufferable. Like, if I met Charlie at a party, I would look for the exit as soon as possible because he's just annoying and insufferable, specifically, but the others aren't much better. And they kind of made these characters relatable, but not in a way where you're supposed to like them. You're supposed to kind of pity them. And I think a movie pulling that off is difficult. Like, if you basically have no likable characters, like Emma, I think is pretty sympathetic because she doesn't do much throughout the movie that causes me to dislike her because she's just trying to reckon with a mistake she once made and everybody else is judging her for it. So in that sense, she's sympathetic. But like in the details, none of these are likable people and people I would want to hang out with. But the movie sold me on the idea of let's watch them disintegrate and struggle and overcome the struggle that is in their heads, like almost entirely in their heads. And I think the movie deserves props for at least for getting me on board with that, because I did not expect this. I expected this to be a chore and obnoxious and so on.
I was going to say, you didn't want to do it. Or if I remember correctly, I don't think you wanted to do it.
I was looking for alternatives. I was saying, is there anything else we can do? And there wasn't. So we did this. But yeah, it's one of those things. Like, it's not the first time this has happened where like the marketing and the trailer just like, it's not even like the trailer doesn't even lie about this. Like, it gives a pretty accurate sense of what kind of movie this is, but it won me over in the details where none of the pieces are something I can get excited about, especially not like what kinds of characters these are and like their personalities and how they interact and how they talk and all of that. None of that is a bonus or a positive. But it all kind of comes together, right? And like I kind of feel for Charlie, especially because he just cannot handle this and he's trying and he wants to make this work, but he can't. And like there's a tragedy, like there's a bumbling, muttering tragedy in this that could overstay its welcome very easily, and it doesn't. I think he really sells like this internal anguish, and like each character has their own version of this, right? Like Emma is very different in terms of how she's dealing with this and how and why she struggles, but both of them I think are really well realized, and you kind of see why they are together and why it's worked out so far. I don't know.
No, I agree. I agree. I think in this movie, anyways, the devil really is in the detail, and sort of know how well crafted the narrative is, and like how well realized all of the characters are, and sort of know putting together enough information about the characters to sort of know give them the reactions that they have and give them sort of know and for us to understand how they're kind of like navigating the new situation that they find themselves in. I think it's all extremely well done. I think this is like the one of the first, like one of the few movies where you kind of go online and the discourse around it is like actually interesting, and like you're kind of like seeing tweets or seeing whatever, and it's just like it's quite interesting how like people have like seen it, taken to the movie, and have like so many kind of different and varied talking points from the movie. I think it does a good job of so much kind of like raising genuine discourse as opposed to just people just shouting at each other that like you're wrong, and this person's or I'm wrong or whatever.
And this really lends itself to being co-opted, right? Like people could start soapboxing about gun control over this. And personally, I've not seen it, but I've not looked very closely. But yeah, what I've seen has been people actually engaging with the story and these characters and asking how they would react in that situation and which of the characters is right and that sort of thing. And that's unusual. Like a lot of the time, people kind of just latch onto a movie and then inject their own thing into it. And that doesn't seem to be happening here very much. Everybody likes this. It's like critics are giving it high ratings, audiences are giving it high ratings. It's all, like at this point, at the time of recording, it's made its budget back, so this might actually make money. I don't know. Like this seems like an all-around success.
So I guess with that, I'd give this an 8 out of 10. This is actually one of the better movies I've seen so far this year. So I mean, I'm actually gonna pump that up to like an 8.5. This was actually a really good time and a really good movie. So I give it an 8.5 out of 10 for me.
Yeah, I think this is really well done. I wouldn't say I had fun watching this, but I can recognize how good it is, and all the attention to detail and the characters and the performances, all of it comes together to essentially be a four-way character study. That is like I've said before, all you need for a good movie is a tight script and good actors, and this has both. So for that reason, that's a 5 out of 6. Like not a fun watch, but an interesting watch, and like just a well-made small original drama. The biggest surprise I had in all of this is that people are actually going to see it.
Yeah, especially after the discussion we had last year about like movies that flopped and movies that were successful last year. I think dramas like had a very rough year last year, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, original dramas is like that's the if you want to lose money on a movie, make an original drama. That's what the numbers said last year. And here it seems to be carried by the stars, which is also unusual, right? Like it doesn't always happen, right? But here you have two really good actors who are bringing their own fan bases. And in addition to that, it's not just that, like people are not just seeing this because their favorite actor is in it. Like people are actually seeing this because it's a good story and they want to see it.
And I think the positive word of mouth will actually help kind of carry this movie over the next couple of weeks as well.
Yeah, I think so. I'm going to keep watching this and see how far this goes. But this is an unexpected success. Like, honestly, it doesn't look like much, right? Like, if you just look at the poster and the trailer, there's 100 movies like this, and all of pretty much, and like 98 of them fail, like financially at least, and in terms of getting attention and in terms of winning people over. And this kind of did, at least it's in the process of doing so, which I think is interesting by itself.
And I guess with that, we reached the end of today's episode. So if you've reached this part of the podcast, then we appreciate you pressing play, giving us a listen, and just generally checking us out. And as always, if you liked what you heard today and you enjoyed our discussion, you should probably tell a friend. And if you hated everything and you thought we were chatting a whole bunch of nonsense, you should probably tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.